The Wes Penra Papers. A Journey Through the Multiverse. The Second Level of Learning. Genesis Paper Number 8, In the Hands of Interdimensional Star Beings by Wes Penra, Thursday, September 13, 2012, http://wespenry.com, Part 1. 1. A serious talk. When the gods and the humans that Lord Enlil had saved had been brought back to Earth, helped down from higher ground, EA had done the same with his enhanced humans, and Enlil finally had calmed down enough to have a serious talk with EA. They met at Sinai Spaceport in the Middle East to have a chat. The discussion went from bad to worse. The two brothers accused each other for one crime after another and threatened each other with death penalty. Enlil accused EA to have gone behind his back and disobeyed his orders as the commander, which is treason, he said, and could be penalized with a death sentence, and he would be fair game for all the rest of the Syrians if he ever showed up in their empire in a new body or in spirit. EA, on his end, accused Enlil for had tried to destroy their experiment without EA's consent, in spite of a contract they had signed ages ago, clearly stating that the two of them would have to make all critical decisions together. So it went on for a while. Enlil insisted that EA had contaminated the original experiment and therefore it had to be destroyed. And here they stood with the remnant of 4 different experiments, Enlil's slave race, without the fire of the goddess, Project Elohim, the enhanced Neanderthals with the fire of the goddess, Project Erectus, slightly less intelligent than Project Elohim, but also with the fire of the goddess, and the Pleiadian giants, not many of them left, but still a decent amount. So, what now? Shouted Enlil. The two brothers stood and stared into each other's eyes for a while, breathing heavily, saying nothing. Enlil finally broke the silence, calmed down and asked his brother to sit down. Enlil had a plan. He said that both Project Elohim and Erectus had been failures in the sense that these humans were too clever. For heaven's sake, they had eaten from both trees and quickly approached the level of the gods. That was not tolerable by any means. The experiment had gone out of hand. Both projects had to stop, and now it was Enlil's turn to set the rules. He demanded it as the Lord of Commands. The biological son of Anu had the following to say: instead of terminating EA's projects, he wanted the humans to be less intelligent and more obedient and available for manipulation. Therefore, he wanted EA to fuse their DNA together, make them less intelligent and less multidimensional. He also wanted them to forget what they had learned from the trees of life and knowledge, and their lifespan should be decreased. Instead of having the chakras too wide open, all of them except the 2 survival chakras, survival and sex, should be closed down. The closed down chakras can be said are connected with the adjunct DNA scientists now have just hardly started to understand. Furthermore, he wanted the men and women of fire to be implanted between lives to forget all about the divine feminine and the feminine universe. No more goddess worship. We are the gods. Enlil said in the middle of an adrenaline rush. We are the ones to be worshipped, not some mother in the stars. We are the heirs of the universe, EA. We are going to take what is ours and the humans are going to help us. EA got furious. He could compromise with the intelligence level of his creation, but not with the fire. That was his ingenious idea and not to be tampered with. And didn't Enlil understand that to connect with the mother universe, they needed humans? With fire? Enlil did understand, but without saying so to his brother, he was afraid of the humans. Their fire was very powerful. He was jealous of them but also afraid they would one day become greater than him. Still, he knew that if the Syrian overlords didn't get access to the fire, they had little chance to accomplish their goal to overthrow the mother goddess. Well, Enlil said. At least reduce their power for now. Create bloodlines who possess more fire than others, and these bloodlines are the ones we will take advantage of firsthand. These are the ones we'll make our personal slaves, especially the women. Let them have your blood and the fire of Nekht, the fire of the Khaa. Let the average mankind forget who they are and where they come from. If they still have the fire, we can take advantage of them, too, but if we breed certain bloodlines, we can let brother and sister, fathers and daughters, mothers and sons be intimate and bear children. These children will be ours to use. The rest of mankind will be our slaves, servants, and foot soldiers as usual. Lastly, enhance the intelligence of those who used to be my minors and slaves before the passing of A.M.E to approximately the same level as the Erectus. Their genetic setup, however, shall prevent spirits of fire to enter these vessels. These humans will not have the fire of the Khaa. Enlil and his brother sat quiet for a while, contemplating what had just been said. Ea thought that most of Enlil's ideas sounded reasonable, especially as he, Nekht's son and master geneticist, knew something Enlil didn't. Even if he stupefied his creation and reduced their fire by adjusting their bodies, the fire would not stay dormant forever, because that is the way of the fire, it can't be kept isolated and imprisoned for any longer duration of time. Sometime in the future, the adjunct DNA would start activating again, especially at the end of a cosmic cycle when information, carried on beams of light, gamma rays in particular, would hit the vessel of the fire, the human body. That would make people wake up again to their true selves. However, wouldn't that be a bad thing for Ea and the Syrians? If humankind wakes up, we will once again be a threat to them, wouldn't we? Not necessarily, Ea thought. Quite the contrary. If he, and his Syrian brothers, would at that point steer the awakening energies in the wrong direction, all that released fire that had been suppressed for so long could be used as an enormous boost and catapulted right into the mother universe. In fact, it was a great idea, he said to himself. If they did the same thing on other planets they had under their control, the released energies could be used exponentially. Perhaps it would be enough for them all to take over the universe? Ea smiled to himself, but didn't mention this to Enlil at the time, knowing he was not receptive for it yet. And in addition, Ea wanted to have time to think about this, because he wanted to be the king of kings of the new universe, and he wanted to figure out how to best get there. Enlil was once again the one who broke the silence. A couple of more things, he said. First of all, once we've managed to erase all the memories of the existing mankind and their future offspring, we need to control them with fear, more so than we did before. We need more food and energy, and that's how we'll get it. Keep them ignorant and distort the mother goddess religion. Let's tell them that right is wrong and wrong is right, and they will never figure it out. Let them worship us as their creators and their gods, and let them fear their supreme being. Promise them a paradise if they bow down to their Lord, and threaten them with a place of eternal fire if they disobey. Make sure they understand that their eternal life depends on how obedient they are. Enlil was very pleased with himself. Secondly, he said and bent over the table to look Ea in his eyes, give Project Elohim to me, and you keep the Erectus, he almost whispered. I want the Elohim. They will be my cattle once you have adjusted them. Okay? And your Pleiadian friends, the giants who survived? For now, I want them under my command so I can keep an eye on them. If I don't have use for them, I want them to be terminated. Ea nodded and said he was fine with this, although he had his own, secret plans. Enlil sat back in his chair and smiled, happy with the outcome. The two brothers stood up, shook hands and went in different directions. 2. The creation of Homo sapiens sapiens. If we ask several anthropologists when Homo sapiens appeared on Earth, we are going to get different answers. Then, if we go and ask different alternative researchers, we are still going to get different answers. Most of the alternative researchers and truth seekers would probably say we were created sometime before the deluge. I partly agree with that, but I also differ with that conclusion. The history of mankind is very complex and multi-layered. We have existed in many different shapes and forms over time, although humans who lived in Atlantis and Mu looked pretty much exactly like we do now, like North and South American Indians, Black Africans, and Caucasians, Atlantis. However, it was after the deluge the final version of mankind was created, with decreased abilities and shorter lifespan. This is why I consider Homo sapiens sapiens being born after the deluge. The versions before the flood were still experiments in progress and would hence be Homo sapiens, without the second sapiens. According to dictionaries, Homo sapiens means thinking man, wise man, rational man, or knowing man. That would have been truer if we talk about Homo sapiens before the flood, but these definitions become less accurate when we describe Homo sapiens sapiens. I'd rather call them, us, modern man. Today's humans, who originate in our current form from the time shortly after the deluge, has been extremely manipulated from the original human, who was our original selves, created not by the Syrians, or even Ea, but by the Queen of the Stars, on a mission from Mother Goddess herself. We are her creation, not a Syrian creation, and this is very important to remember, because the Syrians will tell you they were the ones who created us and will make us feel in debt to them. They will say that without them we would not be as intelligent as we are and still be cavemen. That is their biggest triumph card, and it's based on a lie. The Syrians hijacked an existing experiment, instigated by the Mother Goddess herself, killed off the original inhabitants, destroyed the planet at least twice, and manipulated us into being a much more watered-down version of our true selves than the primordial androgynous human. However, this is still a version with great potentials, for such is the wonder of creation. Our bodies are still incredible vehicles for our souls and can do things we cannot even start to comprehend yet. More will be said about this in the last few papers. Lord Ea did exactly what his brother had suggested, and the enhanced Neanderthal, who generally were shorter, but slightly more intelligent, in general, than the Erectus version, became the Hebrews, Enlil's chosen people, while the Erectus became the Gentiles. The general name for the whole concept of humankind after the flood was not Homo sapiens sapiens, but Lulus. This is what they called us then, and that's what they still call us today. In the conversation I had with Utu Shamash, King Nanar's son, thus Prince of Sirius, he repeatedly called me a Lulu. This is an intimidating term for humans, which classifies us as nothing more than their property, their slaves. If someone calls you a Lulu and knows what it means, they are looking at themselves as for more than you. It didn't require much of an adjustment for Ea and his team to downgrade mankind, and Homo sapiens sapiens, modern man, was born, without any memories of who they were, where they came from and where they were heading. Their minds were wide open to be manipulated, because they had no direction to go. They needed leaders to tell them what to do, and leaders they got. In the beginning, and I am talking about post-deluge here, the world was divided between Syrian overlords and their groups of star beings, whether they were pure Syrians, Greys, Alpha Draconians, Aryans, or some other star race. The fact is that they were all working together even though they often were in disagreement with how to achieve the same goals. 3. The ruling human hybrid bloodlines. The first rulers after the deluge were Syrians. They sat on the thrones of the most powerful kingdoms and empires we know of today. Ea himself, for example, was the first ruler of Egypt, under the name Te. With that, Ea's elitism was quickly re-established, where the few ruled the many. Special breeding program took place to re-establish the pure bloodlines amongst the humans, referring to the chosen few who were born after the gods had had intercourse with human females and impregnated them. These special humans were then eventually succeeding the gods on the throne of certain empire or countries. Some of these pure-blooded hybrids had mostly Aryan blood in them, while others had Syrian fathers. You could often still tell amongst both men and women who had more Syrian blood and Aryan and vice versa, because the Syrian offspring even in our days often have more body hair than those of Aryan descent. Of course, the current population is a mix of everything, but sometimes you can still see if a person has more Syrian than Aryan blood running in their veins. However, just because a person has more body hair, it doesn't mean that person is more hot-tempered, like Syrians are, and vice versa. These days it's more a cosmetic trait. Amongst the ruling elite, however, you may still find those who are more aggressive while there are others who are more strategists, Syrians versus Aryans. The bloodlines then intermarried within the clan of pure hybrids and kept the family line going. This is why the presidents of the United States are all cousins, third cousins, ninth cousin, etc. Researchers who have followed their bloodlines back far enough have noticed that, strangely enough, all these men of power seem to be related somehow. It is not so strange if we know how it was done. The aliens thought that if a person was of their blood, they were for more than the rest of humanity and could rule and control them on behalf of the gods. Big mistake. The kings, pharaohs, and emperors of the world, some of them initiated in secret societies, had too much alien traits in them, and many ruled with an iron fist and started seeing their own fellow humans as more stupid and not worth anything, except being hard workers for the ruling class. Shamans and high priests were still around, but high priestesses were more uncommon, although some rulers had access to them in secret. The male high priests had now taken over the sacred rituals of fire, but couldn't come close to accomplishing what women had in the past. The priestesses who were still around and were employed by the kings, pharaohs, or the emperors, instead of leading the ceremonies, now were attending the ceremonies. There was always a high priest who started off the rituals and the priestess/shaman, now the same thing, continued from there. The results were still quite powerful, but not as powerful as they had been before the flood. The ruling elite, however, learned how to take advantage of the goddess energies that were released in the rituals, not knowing that the gods were also present, attending the ceremonies from other dimensions, where they could accumulate these energies as well. However, there were no tribes or smaller communities anymore, where everybody could sit around a fire and let a woman of fire, a shaman, release enormous 96% energies that the whole tribe could gain from. This was something of the past, and with memories erased, almost nobody could remember those times. The ruling class became very much like the Syrian gods. It was hard to tell whether it was a human who sat on the throne, or a Syrian overlord. The hybrid rulers were often strongly opinionated, and quite intolerant of the people, with a few exceptions. Further down the line, however, when the Syrians wanted to possess those bloodlines and secretly either take over the body of the king, or just possess him and command the soul who was already in there, they found it difficult to do so, because these humans had become so self-assured and had strong personalities. They were hard to penetrate. So, it was time for EA again to do some genetic manipulation on the ruling class. Enlil wanted to dumb them down so it would be easier to penetrate them on a soul level. So from there on, Syrians in the astral could possess the ruling elite and either coexist with the human spirit, born into the body, kick the body out and take it over, or a Syrian soul could be born into the baby body of a ruling elite family. Thus, it was hard to tell, and still is, who of the men of power are humans and who are aliens. Someone says that the eyes give them away, and this is true to some extent, but they also have different energies than all humans, stronger, more intimidating, and putting themselves above others, hierarchical. The fact is that in today's societies, no matter if it's in a city or a suburban area, you have most likely passed a Syrian or other intruding alien on the street without knowing about it, because they are using human bodies just like you and I. Before I understood all this, I was wondering about James of the Wingmakers. He apparently came to Mark Hempel's house, and they sat and drank coffee while Mark interviewed him. The interview can be found at http://wingmakers.com. James admitted to being the CEO of the Kortum, an alien race working with 15 and other top scientists of the world. His real name, he said, is Mahunahi, and as a Kortum he should basically be 7 to 9 feet tall. I was arguing how such a giant could fly with a commercial airline and come to Mark's house in the middle of the day without drawing attention to himself. On the other hand, James says in the interview that his DNA is very similar to that of any other human, and we wouldn't be able to notice much of a difference. Of course not. With the knowledge I now possess, I understand that James, Mahunahi, looks just like you and I. He is Spanish, allegedly born outside Barcelona, because he was born into a human body. That's often how they do it. He may be 7 to 9 feet tall on his home planet, but not while he's here on Earth. What has happened from the time of the deluge and up to the present could fill volumes of books. It would be very interesting to write them, but it's beyond the scope of these papers, which purpose are to put things in perspective so we can understand the forthcoming papers that are talking about present time and the future. These are the real important ones. The papers so far are only background material, but still very significant and necessarily to write.